Welcome to week 11. Today, our goal is to summarize and walk through the book of Deuteronomy. Now, I know as you're reading through Deuteronomy, you're like, why in the world is there another book like the book of Leviticus? And here's the reality is, at least in my mind, the way I like to help categorize it is Leviticus is kind of like the written law of God that God gave to Moses and he writes down and gives it to Israel. Whereas Deuteronomy is a series of like a handful of last final messages or sermons Moses gives orally to the people of Israel, and it was recorded down. And that's how I like to think of it. But anyways, this is, some call them speeches, 3 sermons, 3 speeches in Moses. Some even just say it's just a Pharaoh's speech. But I think it's fair to say, Moses is speaking to Israel now for the last time, and it is likely manifested in at least a few different instances. And we're going to walk through these. And what we're going to do today is we're going to see how chapters 1 through 4 is dealing with God's covenant faithfulness. Chapters 5 through 6 is dealing with a renewed covenant to the law. And then chapters 27 through 30 is about how the Israelites are being called and pressured and pushed, motivated, inspired by Moses to pursue faithful living. And then we transition to chapters 31 through 34 about Moses' final words and his transition of leadership. So the big idea for Deuteronomy is simply a new generation must remember God's covenant faithfulness and renew their covenant commitment before entering into the land of promise. You see, it's not enough for mom and dad to believe. It's not enough for grandma and grandma to believe. We are responsible for our personal walk with the Lord. And that's essentially what Moses is relaying to the people of Israel. So let's look at our first of 4 movements through the book of Deuteronomy. Number 1, remember God's faithfulness. In this section, we're going to talk about chapters 1 through 4. And here we have, it's a summary where Moses is recalling leaving Mount Sinai, the rebellion of the spies, and the wilderness wanderings, and God's victories over their enemies. We have to understand the message now is simple. Remember what God has done so that we can learn from our past failures. Here's the issue, is Israel was so accustomed to not looking to the past to learn and prepare for the future. And many times we wag our fingers and we shake our heads at the Israelites, and we often do the same things. How come we do not take time each year to pause, reflect on how we conducted our life as a Christian, how we served, how we ministered, and then better prepare for the next year? Talk about the different issues and the areas, maybe the disturbances or bumps in the road. How can we learn from them? What are some areas where we were walking this way when we should have been walking this way? And how can we better prepare for the future? I like what somebody said. Well, they well said this. The one thing we learn from history is that we don't learn from history. And that's because we don't know history. And so Israel would have been well and would have done much better if they would have better known their history. And so that's the point of this section. Remember what God has done so that we can better prepare to walk with God in the future. We have to forget that the idea here is when we neglect remembrance and embrace forgetfulness, it will always lead to disobedience. Every time. Chapters 1 through 4 discuss God's faithfulness and how we need to remember it. But chapters 5 through 26, section number 2, is about renewal of the covenant and law. Moses restates the law for a new generation. Even though you go to Exodus chapter number 20 and you read about those 10 commandments, things like, don't worship another God, don't make graven images, don't take God's name in vain, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy, and don't steal and don't lie and don't murder and don't commit adultery and don't bear false witness and honor your father and mother and don't covet. All these different laws we're accustomed to, and Moses is repeating it. repetition is the key to retention, or it is the mother of all learning, as some have said. And so we need things to be repeated over and over again, because then we will likely better keep it. Then in chapter 6, we read about this Shema, where it says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord." And he goes in to talk about how we need to love God with all of our heart, mind, soul, and strength. Jesus is going to reference this many, many years later in the book of Matthew. He's going to talk about it and in the Gospels, in his life, how we are called to love God and love people. But here we see that this Shema is this idea that there is only one God. And we understand him to be Jesus now. They understood him as Jehovah, and we understand Jehovah is Jesus, and Jesus is Jehovah. Then throughout the rest of the section, chapters 7 all the way to 26, we read about the instructions for worship, the instructions for justice and leadership and community life. The main point here is love God and keep his commandments. Simple, just not always easy. And now here I want to just reiterate, I know we did this in Leviticus, but sometimes we need to be reminded. We need to understand that there are categories to these laws. I mean, you've probably been asked, well, why don't you keep these old laws in the Old Testament? Why are you just picking and choosing and cherry picking different things that you should or think you should keep and not keep all of them? I mean, why are you using different material to make clothing? Why don't you have those interesting sideburns? Why do you eat cheeseburgers when the Bible clearly says that's not kosher? So all these particulars, why keep some of the laws and why not others? So let's talk about this. You have the moral law. This is God instructing anybody, or specifically Israel, how to live like a human being, how to be a good human being. These are the moral laws. And so these are the 10 Commandments and others. And now, generally speaking, these are going to transfer into the New Testament. And now there might be a few of them that would not, but generally speaking, they do. And typically, whenever there's a law mentioned in the Old Testament, my standard rule for understanding the Bible is that if it's mentioned again in the New Testament, then I know for sure we need to keep it. Now, that's not always the case, but generally speaking, if it's mentioned and reiterated in the New Testament, we know that it's very clear we have to keep it then. Like, for example, the 10 Commandments. 9 of those 10 Commandments are mentioned in the New Testament directly for us to follow. One that is not is Sabbath. We understand Sabbath. We rest in Jesus Christ now. But it is a good principle for us to follow of taking one day a week and taking time to rest and recharge. Okay, so you have the moral law, these different laws that teach Israel how to live like a good, decent human being. But then you have this idea of civil law. That is, the nation of Israel was a country, and every country on earth, whether it is pagan or Jewish or Islam or Christian or whatever, every nation, whether they have a main religion or not, they're going to have laws that govern them civilly. And there were specific laws that kept Israel functioning as a nation. Obviously, some of these laws can be used by other nations, but they don't have to be. But some of them would be good. But anyways, those are the laws. That's what civil laws is. So that's some of these laws Moses is going to summarize. And then you have this other one, ceremonial laws. And these are how to worship God in a worship service in Israel. How the Israelites were to practice their faith in a worship service. Now, we need to understand that Jesus is the fulfillment of the moral law, Jesus is the fulfillment of the ceremonial law, and Jesus is the fulfillment of the civil law. All three of these categories, the entire law is pointing us to Jesus. He's the fulfillment of all of them. However, because we're under the new covenant now, not all of them need to continually be obeyed. And so that's kind of a summary of this major section here. The key verse obviously is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Number 3, we need to choose faithfulness and life. That's Deuteronomy chapter 27 through 30. Moses here is presenting this idea of covenant blessings and cursings, especially in Deuteronomy 28. A highlight here is like God will bless the Israelites and really anybody who obeys his words. God will chasten, chastise, discipline, and even at times curse all those who practice disobedience, especially when it remains unrepentant. And then there's a call here of choosing life. Deuteronomy 30, verse 19 says, I have set before you life and death. Therefore, choose life. So I urge you, if you don't know Jesus, to choose life in him today. The main message here is Israel must decide whether they will follow God. You know, just because Moses followed God does not necessarily mean Moses' children or grandchildren or those that are his children and grandchildren in the faith are going to follow God too. Every person, every generation is responsible for this idea of following after God and his word. Number 4, Moses provides his final words and passes his leadership off to Joshua. This is chapters 31 through 34. Joshua here is appointed as the new leader. Moses is going to have a song in chapter 32. Chapter 33, Moses is going to bless the tribes of Israel. And then Moses on Mount Nebo is going to die. We have no idea where his body was, but we understand that he did die there. The main message here in this section is God's mission continues even after Moses dies. And so that's really the truth. God gave us a calling, God gave us a command, and we need to keep that command. And when our time is up, we pass that command off to the next generation. And so that is all what the book of Deuteronomy is about. It's about this idea where Moses is going to share his final speeches and sermons to Israel before he passed away. In a sense, it is his last and final words, or his last will and testament, if you will. Well, that concludes our time for today, and may God bless you and equip you to take time to spend time in his word this week. Until next time, may God bless you with a great week.